would say that most of the time when I check this box, it's going to work. And when I check it again, that's going to work. And when I update these notes, that's going to work. When I update the rating, that should work. And so why are we waiting for the server to tell us it was successful? Why don't we just assume that it's going to be successful and let the user continue on with their life? And then if there was a problem, then we can roll it back. That's fine. And that's something that React Query makes relatively simple. So what we're going to do is in this use update list item, we're going to add some additional configuration here. And the configuration we're going to add is an onMutate function. So when we make a mutation, we're going to get access to the new item, this new list item that we're mutating. And I want to take the query cache and I want to set the query data for this query key. So we're going to set the query data for anyone that is consuming this use list items hook. So we'll set that query data for list items, and this allows us to set query data to something specific, or we can pass a function and that will accept the old values and we can return what the new values should be. So we're going to return old.map and we'll take each item and we'll return the original item if it's not the one we're updating, or an updated version of that item. So we can say item.id is the same as the new item.id. So if that's the one we're updating, then we'll merge that item with all of the updates that we're making. So new item. So we're basically doing what the server is going to do and hoping that that actually is going to go through. And if this item isn't the one that we're updating, then we'll go ahead and just return the item. Great. So if we save that, come over here. Now we click on this and boom, you'll notice the UI gets updated immediately. Our status buttons are actually waiting on the promise for that mutation rather than worrying about what the current state of the query cache is, which is why you're going to see that spinner right there. And I actually prefer that, so we're going to leave that as it is. But you'll notice the UI updates perfectly as we make these changes, just assuming that that update is going to go through right away. Now, what if that update doesn't go through right away? So if we go to our request failures and we have a put for API list items and then list item ID. So if we're going to fail when that happens, I click this and it fails, then things actually get restored for me automatically thanks to our query invalidation. But I think it would actually probably be even better if we explicitly recover as well. That way, if we forget to invalidate queries somewhere, we at least cleaned up after ourselves. So let's go ahead and handle that. Before we make this mutation, let's get what the previous items were from the query cache, get query data for the list items, and then we can return something from onMutate, and then we can have an onError that's going to be called with the error that happened, the variables that are associated to that error, and whatever we pass here. So if we return boo, then this value right here will be boo. So what do we want to return there? Well, what if we return a function that does the cleanup? So we'll say query cache, set query data, list items, previous items. So we'll just reset it to what it was before we made our optimistic updates. So then our onError handler can accept a recover function, and all we need to do is call recover. And that should take care of updating our query cache in the event of an error. Great, but this is probably something I want for everything. So any onMutation function that returns a function, we'll just assume that's a recover. So I'm going to remove this from there and we're going to add it to our default mutation options. But not every mutation is going to have a recover. So I'm going to say if type of recover is a function, then we'll call it. This is great. And then we can do the same thing for removal as well. So let's just handle that one too while we're here. We'll add an onMutate that'll take the new item. We'll get our previous items, and lots of this stuff is actually going to be the same. So I'll copy this. And then instead of updating the item, we're actually going to filter it out. So we'll say old.filter, and then we'll take that item and we'll return item.id is not equal to this new item.id. And it probably makes more sense to not call this new item, but removed item. Great, so now we'll get an optimistic update for when we remove it as well. So in review, to do optimistic updates with React Query, you really are just interacting with that query cache and making sure that you clean up after yourself in the event of an error. So we use onMutate to get those updates that we're performing. And before we do our optimistic update, we get a handle on the current value of what this is in the cache. Then we update what's in the cache, and we return a recovery function that our default onError can handle. So if there is an error, then we'll accept that recover function and we'll call it, which will reset our query cache data to what we had before this error occurred. And then we do something very similar for our removal, and we get really nice optimistic updates. So our UI feels super snappy for users.